Subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming transformations. Like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. What's your definition of true love? The billionaire, the churro vendor, and the twins. A past he couldn't outrun. The acrid smell of burnt sugar mingled with the chaotic symphony of Madrid's Gran Via. Amidst the blaring horns and tourist chatter, a woman sold churros from a rusty cart, her face weathered by the Spanish sun, her eyes holding a lifetime of stories. Beside her, two young boys, twins, stood. Not identical, but eerily similar to a past Fernando Alvarez had tried desperately to outrun. When his gaze landed on them, time screeched to a halt. In that electrifying instant, the man who seemingly had it all realized he might have lost the only thing that ever truly mattered. Madrid simmered under the golden evening light. On the Gran Via, ancient buildings seemed to melt under the city's pulsing heat. Traffic crawled with its usual irritating slowness, impatient horns cutting through the suffocating air. Tourists huddled in lines for a poorly framed selfie. But amidst the chaos, there was a small point of silence, a rusty cart flanked by a faded red umbrella, exhaling the sweet, warm scent of burnt sugar. There, between the shouts of street vendors and the metallic clang of subway trains, a woman sold churros. Her hair tied back with a loose band, her face burned by the Madrid sun, and a gaze that carried more time than her age revealed. Beside her, two children. Twins, not identical, but so similar that no one would dare question it. One was quieter, with downcast eyes, attentive to the money. The other showed a lively restlessness, as if everything around him was too new to be ignored. They took turns giving change, paper bags, contained smiles. They didn't ask questions. They didn't play. They worked, as if they had learned too soon the value of every coin. Fernando Alvarez adjusted his tie for the third time in 10 minutes. The Mercedes's air conditioning blocked the heat, but it didn't stifle the restlessness coming from within. He didn't usually come to Madrid personally. He had people for that. But this week, he needed to convince the last investors that his new educational AI line was the revolution they didn't know they needed. 2 days, 3 meetings. That was all. Then the jet back to Barcelona, and the same polished, silent, predictable routine. Then he saw her. At first, he thought it was a reflection, an image his mind had created out of fatigue or boredom. But when he turned his eyes back to the same spot on the pavement, the image was still there. Her? Clara? The world lost its sound for a second. It wasn't a memory. It was a punch, an emptiness in his chest that no million in investments could fill. Clara was there, selling churros. She wore an oil-stained shirt, sleeves rolled up to her elbows. She was sweating. She looked exhausted. She looked real. And the two children beside her. Fernando felt his stomach clench, his whole body tensed as if he had been torn from time. His eyes met theirs, and that tore him apart. They were his. They were. What was she doing there? How? Why? "Stop the car," he mumbled, dry-mouthed. The driver looked at him in the rearview mirror. "Sir?" "Stop the damn car! We're in a bus lane, sir. There's police everywhere." Fernando was already unbuckling his seatbelt. He didn't wait. He opened the car door while it was still moving, stepped out into the middle of the street, amidst blaring horns and protests. His jacket flew over his shoulder. His briefcase fell onto the seat. Did he run? He ran like someone fleeing his own life. The leather of his shoe hitting the hot pavement, his shoulders bumping into strangers, sweat running down his temples. People stared, of course. They recognized him. It was him. The Forbes cover, the Spanish genius, The billionaire with a predatory gaze. Now there, running like a madman down a crowded sidewalk. But when he arrived, the cart was no longer there. The children had disappeared. Clara, too. The red umbrella had been folded up. On the ground, a dark oil stain still steamed. An empty paper bag floated in the wind and settled on Fernando's expensive shoe. He spun around like a cornered animal, trying to find them among the random faces, the hurried footsteps, the muffled shouts of the city. They were nowhere, as if they had been erased, as if he had dreamed it. But he knew it was real, because nothing hurt as much as that. He leaned against a lamppost. He was breathing heavily. His hands trembled. He hadn't felt that in years. There was no control. There were no numbers to calculate, arguments to present, contracts to renegotiate. Only absence remained. The absence of something he didn't even know still lived inside him. He didn't remember the last time he had looked into Clara's eyes, nor the exact tone of her voice. He only remembered the last unanswered message, the silence he chose to maintain. Beatrice's warning. She's unstable. It's better if you stay away. This will hurt you. And he, of course, believed her. After all, he had goals. He had a future to build. Now, he was there, in the middle of an avenue that forgives no one, surrounded by cars that wouldn't stop, people who wouldn't look, and a hole in his chest that nothing, not money, not success, not applause, could fill. Fernando took his phone out of his pocket, but he didn't know who to call. His world was made of numbers, notifications, and promises, and none of those promises included Clara. He sat on the step of a closed bench. His suit now clung to his body. Sweat stained his Italian shirt. A man passed by selling water, shouting prices with a foreign accent. A child cried in the distance. The city went on. But Fernando didn't. He stayed there, waiting for a miracle. Or an explanation. Maybe hoping she would come back. Perhaps, deep down, hoping for something he himself destroyed. Nothing he had built made sense at that moment. He who dominated boardrooms with a single phrase, who made CEOs tremble with a glance, who knew everything about mergers, acquisitions, market forecasts. He didn't know how to recover what he saw in that corner. Two children who looked like him, with his eyes, his posture, the way they frowned. But they didn't know him. They didn't call him anything. And that was what hurt the most. Fernando stayed there until the sky darkened, until the Gran Via lit up its neon signs and seemed like another place, colder, faster, more impersonal. Then he stood up. He looked one last time at the empty spot where the cart had been, and he understood, with a clarity that no reports in his life could offer. Not everything that is lost is irrecoverable. But nothing comes back the same. Chapter 2. Midnight Encounters. The next day began without warning. Fernando woke up before his alarm vibrated. The sheets were still damp with sweat. The previous day's suit tossed over the hotel armchair like a defeated body. The sky over Madrid was cloudy, but inside him, the storm had already begun. He ignored the 3 alerts on his phone screen. Meeting with Norwegian investors at 10 a.m., lunch with the Swedish Fund's board, press conference at 5 p.m. on the merger with the digital learning platform. He dismissed all alerts with a tap. Then he turned off the device. He wasn't going anywhere. He didn't want numbers or graphs. He wanted names, an address, an explanation. He wanted to know if what he had seen was real or a hallucination sown by the guilt he never had the courage to admit. He called Domingo, a retired accountant, a friend of his late father's, a dry, observant man, one of those who still kept accounts in a worn notebook with pages yellowed by time. Domingo knew the city's backstage like no one else. He was the kind of man who knew who lived where, with whom, why, and since when. "I need a favor," Fernando said, without beating around the bush. "And I need you to tell me what you're looking for before I hang up," the old man replied from the other end of the line, with that tone of someone who never forgot the years Fernando disappeared, leaving the past as if it were a disposable piece of his own history. Clara Torres, from the other end, silence. Then, a dry cough, and a sigh. "I thought that name had died with your pride." Fernando closed his eyes, took a deep breath. "Just tell me where she is." It took 5 more minutes and 2 direct requests for Domingo to give him an address, scribbled on a napkin. Calle Monte Perdido, Vallecas. The neighborhood where the city seems to forget itself, where the glitter of the capital doesn't reach, and the sidewalks are cracked like the dreams of those who grew up there. It was a Madrid that Fernando had left behind long ago, and perhaps, with it, he had left everything that was once real. That afternoon, the luxury car drove through the narrow streets of Vallecas like a ship out of place in time. Neighbors stared. Children interrupted their football game in the middle of the street to watch. The tinted glass reflected the world without letting it in. Fernando parked in front of a house with a worn facade, paint peeling at the edges, the iron gate twisted and scratched, with a small hole where there used to be a peephole. The doorbell was a button hanging from an almost loose wire. He pressed it. Nothing. He pressed it again. Footsteps shuffled on the other side. The sound of a chain being removed. A bolt. A long creak. Then the door opened. And there she was, Clara. No makeup. Her hair tied in a makeshift bun, her skin unfiltered, her eyes slightly swollen like someone who hadn't slept well in years. And yet, or perhaps because of it, she was more beautiful than any memory. But it took time. It took extra seconds for her to recognize him, as if time had done its work with cruel diligence. When her eyes narrowed and her lips parted in a line of tense recognition, Fernando felt his body grow heavier. She didn't smile. She didn't approach him. She didn't ask how he was. Her voice came out like a sheathed blade. "What are you doing here, Fernando?" His name on her lips had a different weight now, as if it were spat out after years of accumulating venom. He opened his mouth, but took time to speak. "I came to do the right thing. Can I help? With money." Clara took a step out of the doorway. She leaned against the frame with one arm, crossed the other over her chest. She laughed. But it wasn't just any laugh. It was dry, short, mocking. "You're still the same." Fernando swallowed hard. "Clara, I saw them yesterday, on the Gran Via, and you thought you could just show up here today, as if you'd forgotten where you left us." "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. If I had known." Her eyes gleamed, but it wasn't emotion. It was pain. Alive? Intact? You didn't know, not because it was impossible to know, but because you never wanted to look. "That's not fair," she exploded. And it wasn't with shouts. It was with a low, firm tone, torn from within. "I went to your company, Fernando. Pregnant. With my belly starting to show. I went there. I tried to call you. I tried to find you. Do you know what happened?" She took another step. Her face was now inches from his. "Your secretary, Beatriz, stopped me. She said you were with someone else. That it was better if I disappeared. That you didn't want anything to do with me anymore." Fernando felt the words like punches to the stomach. He tried to deny it, but he had no strength. "Beatriz, she took care of everything." "Oh? She took care of everything? Even who could or couldn't love you?" He didn't answer. Why did she know? Why did she choose? Why was it easier? "You didn't listen to me, Fernando. You didn't even try. You disappeared. You erased me from your life as if I were a miscalculation." She turned away. "Clara, please." "No." She turned again, her face burning, her eyes full of tears, but not letting them fall. "You chose to believe anyone but me, and that destroyed me." The gate creaked. The bolt was pushed shut with force. The iron hit the frame with a dry clang, and Fernando stood there, motionless, his hand still extended. The world around him seemed smaller, slower, colder. He looked at the house's facade. He saw the damp stains on the walls, the makeshift clothesline with small clothes, a pair of children's shoes hanging in the window. The silence now was a scream, and all he could do was listen to it, because for the first time in many years, there was nothing he could buy except the right to feel, and that he had in spades. His chest burned, his throat was dry, but he stayed a little longer, without words, without justifications, with the weight of every silence he himself had built. Did that revelation shock you? Subscribe to our channel and like this video if you're hooked. Comment below. What do you think Fernando's next move should be? The first attempt was ridiculous. 2 days after being left at the door like any stranger, Fernando still walked like a ghost among his own thoughts. He slept poorly, his mind replaying every word Clara had said, as if searching in them for some crack to justify the unforgivable. But there was none. His silence had cost a life that went on without him. And now, every gesture was an attempt at repair, presence, return. On Friday morning, his assistant entered the hotel suite with a tablet in hand and a hesitant expression. "Sir, these orders came in," she said, sliding her finger across the screen. 4 boxes of Burberry children's clothes, Lego education toys, 2 PS5s, and a delivery of tickets to Warner Park, with a chauffeur at his disposal. Fernando didn't look at her. He continued writing. "Send everything to this address," he said, pushing a card with Domingo's hasty handwriting. "Calle Monte Perdido 41, Vallecas." "Sir, are you sure?" "That's it." She nodded, asking no more questions. The boxes were dispatched that same day. Fernando remained silent, waiting for a message, a response, a half-open door. But nothing came. On Saturday morning, 1 delivery returned, then the 2nd, the 3rd. By late afternoon, the boxes were piled in the hotel reception like a monument to futility. A room service employee commented, unaware he was nearby. He sent all that as if love were a gift from an expensive store. It was like a slap in the face, but he didn't react. He went up to his room, opened the first box. He took out some expensive children's sneakers, ran his finger over the perfect leather, and stared at them as if they were artifacts from a life that didn't belong to him. He knew everything about investments, but he had no idea how to regain the trust of 2 children he had never met. And then, on Sunday morning, his phone vibrated. It was a short message. "Clara, you can pick them up at 11 a.m., but you return them at 5 p.m. and no surprises." Fernando took 10 seconds to believe it was real. Then, another moment to decide what to do. He called the chauffeur, asked him to prepare the car, and contacted a VIP experience company. He wanted the complete package. Shopping on Serrano Street, a private cinema with waiters serving gourmet popcorn, lunch at Salamanca neighborhood's most awarded tapas restaurant. He spared no expense. At 11 o'clock sharp, he was in front of the house in Vallecas. Clara didn't come out. One of the children, the more talkative one, had his backpack slung over his shoulder. The other, more reserved, came out with short, almost suspicious steps. "Ready?" Fernando asked. "Forcipita, tingasimwa." They nodded in silence, like someone accepting a polite obligation. In the car, the chauffeur asked, "Destination?" Fernando hesitated, then replied with forced conviction, "Serrano, El Corte Inglés shopping center. The younger child looked at his brother. Then he turned to Fernando. Can we just go to El Retiro Park? Fernando frowned, surprised. Don't you want to go to the cinema? A place with air conditioning, with ice cream and good food? The child shrugged. We've never been to El Retiro. There are little boats and kites. Fernando looked into his eyes. There was no pleading. There was sincerity, and a lightness that disarmed him. He sighed. Then let's go to El Retiro. The change of plans seemed to please them immediately. The two began to talk to each other about what they wanted to see. Ducks, the kiosk, the shaved ice stand. Fernando turned off his phone. He canceled the reservations. At the park, he soon realized how out of place he was. His freshly ironed white shirt got dirty when he tried to push one of the children on the swing. Spilled juice soaked his trousers. At one point, he tripped trying to keep a kite in the air and fell to his knees on the ground. People laughed. He almost laughed himself. But the children truly laughed. Not at his suit, not at his fall. They laughed with him. It was a light, free, genuine laugh. And for the first time since he had seen them on the Gran Via, Fernando felt something akin to belonging. Hours passed amidst the grass, improvised games, and warm benches. They ate sandwiches bought from a street vendor. He didn't know what a bocadillo de calamares was, but he took the chance. And he loved it. Not for the taste, but for the experience. On the way back, the youngest, his face slightly flushed from the sun, asked from the back seat, "Why do you wear boss clothes every day?" Fernando looked in the rearview mirror. "To look strong," the child thought, then concluded, "But you're more fun when your shirt is dirty." Fernando smiled, but not with his lips. It was an internal smile, a kind of truth he didn't know where to keep. "I was an idiot," he said, looking at them in the mirror. "I lost everything trying to seem like someone I didn't even like." The children didn't reply, but he saw it. They understood. In front of the house in Vallecas, Clara was already waiting, arms crossed, face serious. "You were punctual," she said dryly. "I've always been good with schedules," he replied, opening the car door for his children. She noticed his state, dirt on his knees, stained shirt, hair messy from the wind. And for a second, her face softened. But only for a second. "Did they have fun?" she asked. Without emotion, "I think so," Fernando replied, looking at the children. "You didn't give them expensive toys?" "No, just fried calamari sandwiches and kites." She let out a slight sigh and nodded. Fernando didn't ask to come in, nor to stay 5 more minutes. He just looked into Clara's eyes. "Thank you," he said. "For today," she didn't reply. But she didn't slam the door in anger. She just closed it. Calmly, Fernando returned to the car. He sat in the back seat, sweaty, tired, smelling of grass and cheap fried food, and, for the first time in a long time, he was glad of it. The sky was pale when Fernando arrived at Casa de Campo Park that morning. The light filtered through the tree branches as if the day was still hesitant to begin. The silence there wasn't an absence of sound. It was a pause between worlds, that of those who passed by too quickly, and that of those who stayed to face what remained. He thought he arrived early. He sat on a worn, dark wooden bench facing the lake. The air smelled of damp earth and leaves. Some children played in the distance, their laughter muffled by the distance. Birds crossed the sky in slow movements. The city seemed different, and so did he. He held a still warm coffee in his hands, bought on the way, more out of habit than desire. The cup's paper was starting to give way to the heat. He didn't drink it. He just waited. When Clara appeared, she seemed part of the landscape. Worn sneakers, a gray t-shirt that enhanced her skin's warm tone, and her hair loose, dancing in the wind. She didn't carry a bag, nor was she in a hurry. She approached without ceremony, without greeting, without easy smiles. "You're early," she said, sitting beside him. Though leaving a space between them, "I needed to get here early," he replied. "You always do." She said nothing more for a while. They sat there, side by side, not looking at each other. The silence was dense but not hostile. It was a kind of old respect, a pause before the abyss. "I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after you left," she said, looking straight ahead, as if speaking to the lake. Fernando didn't move. "I thought it was a delay due to stress, but it wasn't. And when I confirmed it, I got on a train that same week. I went to your company." Her voice was firm, but every word seemed to pierce her from within. "I got to reception. Your secretary recognized me. I told her I needed to see you, that it was urgent. She looked at me as if I were a stain on the carpet, and then she took me to a room." She stopped, breathed deeply. Her eyes followed the gentle movement of the water. 5 minutes later, another woman entered, elegant, in heels, expensive perfume, and an empty gaze. She said her name was Beatrice, that she was your new advisor, that she knew exactly what was going on, and that you didn't want anything to do with me anymore. Fernando closed his eyes. Clara continued. "She said you were with another woman, that you had already moved on, that what we had, you and I, was a mistake from the past, and that if I had any dignity, I would disappear, that you didn't need any more scandals, that your career was taking off, and that an unwanted pregnancy would ruin everything." He opened his mouth to speak, but she raised her hand. It wasn't a gesture of anger, it was control. "I left there feeling dirty, stupid. I believed in you, Fernando. Even after the end, I believed that at least you would listen to me, but you didn't." Now she looked at him directly. There were no tears. There was a strange peace, a painful lucidity. "I wasn't looking for your help. I wasn't after your money. I just wanted to be heard, to be treated with respect, to be seen, not ignored as if our story had been a delusion of mine." Fernando swallowed. The coffee in his hands was already cold, the paper wet. His fingers trembled. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "But you didn't want to know either," she replied, without aggression. "That's what hurts the most. You blindly trusted someone you didn't know, and you ignored me, who was by your side for 3 years, who believed in you before any investor." He looked away. The wind scattered dry leaves onto his shoes. The pain was different now. It wasn't rage, nor guilt. It was shame. The kind that settles in the chest and silently corrodes. "I was a coward," he finally said, his voice lower than he himself expected. "I hid behind success, behind goals. I thought that if I worked hard enough, everything that didn't work out would disappear. And when she, Beatrice, told me that you caused a scandal at reception, I believed her, and I was too cowardly to find out for myself." Clara looked at him sideways. Her expression was hard to read. "You believe money buys protection, Fernando. But in reality, it isolated you. It took you away from everything that had real value." He nodded. He was learning that too late. "Forgive me," he said. "Not now, but someday. For everything you had to face alone. For the pain, for the omission, for not being there, for not even trying." She took a deep breath. Her eyes returned to the lake. The sound of children in the distance seemed more intense now, as if the world was returning. "I cried a lot," she said, without drama. "At first, every day. I slept on a friend's sofa, with the two of them crying in a makeshift crib. I lost my job. I spent months trying to get back on my feet. But something I knew. I wasn't going to beg anyone to see me." Fernando squeezed the cup until it almost broke. "You don't know how much it hurts me to know that now." She looked at him. And in that gaze, there was something that disarmed him, It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't rage. It was a serene pain. The pain of someone who had already cried all the tears they had to cry, of someone who had turned every tear into strength, and now looked at the past with enough distance not to want to repeat it. "I don't hate you, Fernando," she said, "but you're no longer who I expected you to be." He nodded slowly. That hurt more than any scream. "I just want to be a decent father," he murmured. "And if it's still possible, a man who learned something." Silence returned. But this time, it was lighter. The sun began to break through the clouds. The light softly touched his face. "You don't have to prove anything to me," she said. "You have to prove it to them, day after day, without excuses, without expensive gifts, without justified absences." Fernando looked at the sky, then at her. "I'm willing to do it. For them. And also for me." Clara stood up. She stretched her shoulders. She crossed her arms, looking at the lake. "That depends on time. And on them. I'm not going to force them to love you, nor defend you if you fail again. But if you are, truly, perhaps there's still time." He also stood up. They stood side by side, in silence, watching the boats on the lake. The world around them continued, but between them, something stopped. An old pain, an unresolved past, a story that was now beginning to breathe. She took out her phone, typed something quickly. "I sent you the address of the next school meeting, if you want to go." He read it and smiled. Not out of relief, nor achievement, but like someone who understands that you can start over if you don't try to go back to the starting point. The first school meeting was in a pale building with graffiti-covered walls, in the heart of Usera, a neighborhood where the students' names were more diverse than the languages spoken in the hallways. Nothing there resembled the bilingual schools where Fernando used to invest millions. There was no robotics or digital panels, just a broken fan on the wall and colorful posters with children's drawings taped crookedly. Fernando arrived 20 minutes early, as for any commitment he considered important. And, curiously, this one was. He wore simple jeans and an unbranded sweatshirt. His luxury watch stayed in the hotel drawer. He was trying to adapt to the new language of presence, where punctuality was worth more than pomp, where sitting on a plastic chair was harder than negotiating contracts in 3 languages. Clara was already in the classroom, sitting in the back row, her legs crossed and her face serene. She greeted him with a slight nod, nothing special, but not hostile either. That was new. It was space. The teacher called the parents by their children's last names: Santiago Torres, Mateo Torres. Fernando almost corrected her, but didn't. Torres, the mother's last name, the only one they had carried for 7 years without their father. That hurt and healed at the same time. During the meeting, the teacher talked about the group's difficulties, the importance of reading at home, and extra math classes on Wednesdays. Simple, everyday things. But to him, they seemed immense. He had never heard the names of his children's friends. He had never seen their handwriting. He never knew what they dreamed of becoming when they grew up. On the way out, Clara stopped beside him in the hallway. "Thanks for coming," she said, without looking directly at him. "Don't thank me. It's my obligation," he replied. She nodded, and for the first time she smiled. Brief, discreet, but real. The transformation began there. Small, invisible to others, but fierce within him. With each visit, Fernando arrived with fewer certainties and more questions. He sat on the floor of Clara's small apartment and listened to the children explain the rules of a new game. He washed dishes without being asked. He helped with homework. He invented ridiculous songs for the youngest to learn multiplication tables. One afternoon, Clara arrived home from work and found Fernando in the kitchen, wearing a child's apron, rice slightly burning in the pot, and 2 deformed croquettes being cheered by the children as if they were trophies. "Was this supposed to be food?" she asked with a contained laugh. "It was supposed to be edible, yes," he said, with mock seriousness. "But the judges of the house said it deserves 3 stars. At most 3 days of diarrhea," she replied, and they laughed. That night, they all had dinner together, at the same table. No phones, no distractions. Fernando was starting to notice the details. The way Santiago wrinkled his nose when he didn't like something. How Mateo always ate the edges first. The way Clara swirled her glass before drinking juice, even if it was already mixed. These small, irrelevant things, for any spreadsheet, became part of a routine that, little by little, ceased to be provisional. He started picking the children up from school on Fridays. He learned to take the bus with them. He played football on a dirt field, slipped in the mud, tore his pants, and laughed. He began to understand what it meant to be, without planning, without buying, without disguising. One night, Mateo fell playing ball. He scraped his knee and tried to hide the pain. Fernando ran to him, knelt down, and the child cried. Not from pain, but because he trusted. At that moment, he knew he was no longer a visitor. One afternoon, Clara watched him from the window. Fernando was sitting on the floor, helping Santiago put together a 1,000-piece puzzle. They failed more often than they succeeded, but they didn't give up. She crossed her arms. She watched in silence. There were no masks, no poses. After dinner, rice, beans, and croquettes made by the children under dubious supervision. Clara took the dishes to the sink and stood there, still, feeling the hot steam from the water, the simple smell of food and laughter. "Are you trying?" she said, without turning around. Fernando, who was still drying the table, stopped. He didn't answer immediately. He let the phrase fill the space between them. "This time, for real," he said, in a low, almost hoarse voice. She turned slowly. "I'm not going to applaud you for doing the bare minimum, Fernando. I'm just saying, I'm seeing it. I don't want applause. I just want them to know they can count on me. Truly, without an expiration date." She approached, grabbed a cloth, and began to dry the dishes beside him, both working in silence, like someone building something without haste, brick by brick, with their hands in the water. Fernando realized he no longer felt the urgency to prove anything, neither to her, nor to himself. Time there didn't have to be measured in efficiency. It was the opposite of everything he knew. One day, the children called him Daddy. It wasn't planned, nor solemn. Mateo forgot his pencil case at school, and when telling about it, blurted out, "Daddy, can you get it tomorrow?" Fernando didn't react at the moment, only later. In the car, when he was alone, he cried in silence, like someone who finally crosses a desert and finds a spring. Small, unexpected, but alive. On weekends, they went hiking. They went to the neighborhood cinema. They played dominoes on the living room floor. Life wasn't a script. It was improvisation. But now, he knew how to follow the melody. The old image of the controlled, inflexible businessman disappeared faster and faster. And what was born was someone who listened, who made mistakes, who got his hands dirty and still felt whole. Clara kept watching, skeptical at first, then moved. Her gaze now carried something new, not hope, yet, but perhaps peace. And peace, for someone like her, was a luxury greater than any gift he could have bought. High up in the glass tower in Chamartin's financial center, the city's reflections multiplied in the windows, as if Madrid had been cloned in cold tones of steel and silence. It was there that Fernando returned, weeks later, with a different look. One that didn't ask permission, that didn't drag doubts. A look that, until recently, he didn't know he could hold without the mask of executive coldness. This time, he wasn't wearing the Italian suit that made him untouchable. A light blue shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, his hair a little messy from the wind. He walked through the company corridors like someone entering an old house he no longer recognized. The carpets with geometric patterns, the controlled scent of lavender and leather, the giant screens showing financial indices. Everything seemed small to him now. Cold? Artificial? The receptionists stood up when they saw him. Assistants interrupted meetings. No one expected him, and that was part of the plan. He went up alone. The executive floor was, as always, empty, sterile, calculated even in its silence. The kind of environment where no emotion is welcome, only performance. The door to Beatrice's office was ajar. She was talking on the phone, her back to him, looking at the avenue through the glass wall. She wore a white tailored suit, her hair pulled back in a perfect bun, and an impeccable posture. She looked like a statue of command. Fernando entered without knocking. He closed the door behind him. She turned at the click. "Fernando, what a surprise," she said, hanging up the phone without losing control of her face. "I didn't come to chat," he said. She slowly crossed her arms, analyzing him with that clinical gaze she used even to fire someone. "Are you here to complain? Aren't we a little past that?" He walked to her desk without haste. He took a folder from the leather backpack he wore over his shoulder. He placed it on the glass without ceremony. She raised an eyebrow. "Papers? I thought you had adapted to digital by now." "This isn't for filing. It's to show you what remained etched in time." She opened the folder. Images, copies of security records, intercepted email captures. Conversations archived by a secretary who, years later, resigned with guilt in her chest and handed everything over to Domingo, the retired accountant. Clara, in effect, had been there. Beatrice slowly scrolled through the pages with her eyes, showing no surprise. She only gave a slight shrug, a silent, almost cynical defense. "You trusted too much. Someone had to take care of you." "Take care of me?" he asked, his voice low. "Contained. Or control what made you lose ground?" Beatrice set the papers aside and, finally, looked at him directly. "She would have destroyed you. She was unstable, weak. You needed to stay focused. You had investors waiting, competitors advancing. You had a pregnant woman being blocked by a message you fabricated. You had 2 children being born while you said I was with someone else. You destroyed something that didn't belong to you, Beatrice." She took a deep breath. For the first time, her posture began to give way. "I did what was necessary. You are the product. You always were. You didn't have time for emotional scandals. Your image, my image, was exactly what kept me away from real life." The silence now was different, denser, closer to the truth. Fernando approached the window. He looked at the city below, the same city where, now, he was nothing more than another father waiting for his children's football practice, with the smell of tomato sauce on his shirt. "I was never what you sold, and you never protected me. You just manipulated me to maintain control. You gave me the world, and you took away the only part that made sense." She stood up, erect. The same woman who years ago had reduced Clara to an obstacle now seemed about to break her own composure. "I didn't expect this from you, Fernando. I thought you were more practical." He smiled without joy. "I thought so too." He turned and walked towards the door. Before leaving, he stopped. He looked at her over his shoulder. "As of today, you decide nothing about my personal life. You are out of executive management. You will be relocated as legal advisor. Nothing more." She raised her eyebrows, incredulous. Is this personal? This is final. He opened the door. He left. He didn't look back. In the corridors, employees watched him, not as the untouchable CEO, but as someone who had returned from a place few dared to tread. The place of repentance lived to the end. Leaving the building, the sunset light began to draw golden shadows over the cars. The world continued to spin with its haste, but Fernando now walked at his own pace. He took out his phone. He typed, "Parents meeting tomorrow at 6 p.m. I'll be there. Want pizza afterwards?" The reply came quickly. Short. "They'll love it," he smiled. Because now, finally, he knew exactly what he wanted to build with what he had. And what money couldn't buy, he had begun to deserve. It didn't happen overnight. Time didn't rush as in movies. There was no soundtrack or fast-forward montage with smiles growing scene after scene. There was silence, breaths, small gestures, glimpses without subtitles, a slow, honest, imperfect construction, like everything made to last. It was on a hot afternoon after another school meeting that Fernando blurted out, with the naturalness of someone who doesn't rehearse, "I want to help you move out of that apartment." Clara slowly turned her face, her eyes narrowed as if she was still testing every word that came from him. "It's not for you," he added. "It's for them. They deserve a space where they can grow without tripping over boxes, where they can run, plant something in the garden, shout without bothering the neighbors." She looked at him for long seconds. "The house will be in their names." Fernando nodded without hesitation. "How it should be." Clara didn't answer, but she didn't refuse either. And for someone like her, that was a yes. Over the following weekends, they visited neighborhoods together. They looked for houses that didn't look like showrooms. Clara rejected any mansion with a wall alarm or a magazine-perfect garden. She wanted real soil, a gate that creaked, old tiles that told a story, and space for everyone to fit, and also for what they were yet to become. They found the house on a quiet street in Alcalá de Henares, where the sidewalk smelled of pan con tomate in the morning, and neighbors still said good morning, looking you in the eye. It was simple, but it had a patio with an almond tree and space for a swing. The exterior paint needed touch-ups. There was a subtle crack near the terrace. But Clara smiled when she saw the kitchen, and the children ran to the garden as if they already knew that place was theirs. The first week, Fernando went every day. He had paint on his arms, brush marks on his legs, and a new piece in his chest. They painted the rooms together. Santiago chose blue with yellow stripes. Mateo, a green that changed with the light. He didn't argue. He just bought the brushes and helped stick dinosaur and rocket decals. They assembled furniture, got the measurements wrong, hung shelves crookedly, and laughed about it. The last Saturday before the definitive move, Fernando appeared with a large package. "What's that?" Clara asked, crossing her arms. "A promise," he replied. He opened the box. Inside, white sheets, colored lights, and wooden stakes. That night, in the center of the new living room, still without a sofa, the four of them set up a makeshift tent. They hung lights on the ceiling, scattered cushions on the floor, and stayed inside, barefoot and with their laughter mingled with the dim light. The children fell asleep first, each one leaning on one of their parents. Clara, reclining with her eyes closed, seemed at peace. Fernando observed the contour of her face illuminated by the colored lights. She slowly opened her eyes and said, almost in a whisper, "Thank you for coming back." He reached out his hand. He found hers among the blankets. He squeezed it firmly, not to hold her back, but to confirm she was still there. "I didn't come back," he murmured. "I stayed. For the first time, I stayed." She turned her face. Her eyes were moist, but there was no pain in them, only an old weariness and relief. He approached slowly. Their noses touched first, then their mouths. A kiss. Simple. Warm. Without adorned promises, without poisoned vows. It didn't bring a fairy tale. It brought history. It was the kiss of those who had already fallen, already left, already failed, and now chose to stay. Without certainties, but with intention. The next morning, Fernando woke up with the sun in his face. Mateo slept hugging his arm. Santiago was covered up to his head. Clara was still asleep, her hair spread over the pillow, a slow breath beating against his chest like a living reminder. He didn't want to move. He didn't want to lose that. The house still had boxes on the floor. There was no Wi-Fi installed. No sofa. The fridge beeped because it was almost empty. But there were laughs, paint marks on the terrace, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, and a silence that didn't suffocate. That same afternoon, they planted a basil plant near the almond tree. Clara said she wanted fresh herbs in the kitchen. Fernando didn't know the difference between parsley and cilantro, but he learned, laughing at his mistakes. The children hung a swing on the thickest branch of the tree, tied with a double rope. The first time Fernando pushed Mateo, he almost fell. But his son's laughter was louder than the imbalance. Later, they painted the gate blue together. A blue that Clara said looked like a winter sky. Cold, but clean. At the end of the night, they all sat on the terrace floor. Clara brought cold lemonade and churros from a neighborhood bakery. They sat in silence. No one needed to fill anything. Everything was full. Fernando observed his children's faces under the yellowish light of the street lamp. He looked at Clara, who looked back at him with the same tenderness as when she first loved him, but now with something stronger. Certainty? He moved closer to her and, without saying anything, touched her hand. She didn't pull away. He didn't promise eternity, or perfect days. But there was something truer in that gesture, because their love didn't come in a hurry. It came with falling, with stumbling, with waiting, with loss. But it came, and most importantly, it stayed. 3 years have passed. The swing on the almond tree still creaks on Saturday mornings. The smell of homemade croquettes still invades the terrace every time the oven is opened. And the sound of children's laughter now resonates louder, not only because of Santiago and Mateo's mischief, but because of the presence growing silently within Clara. Isabella. 6 months of waiting. Her belly already molded her steps and transformed her gestures into a slow dance. Mateo lived with his ear pressed against her belly, swearing he had heard his sister laugh. Santiago promised he would teach her to ride a bicycle, even though months still remained until she was born in December. Fernando now knew what it meant to stay, not just with his feet inside the house, but with his whole soul. He no longer looked at the clock expecting the next meeting. He looked at it to know how much time was left to feel Isabella move again. He discovered that reading bedtime stories was as important as any presentation to investors, that assembling a crib was more challenging and more rewarding than any corporate merger. The new house in Alcalá de Henares had come alive. The walls were full of crooked drawings, festive dates scribbled, and pencil marks on the kitchen door marking the children's height, month by month. That night, Clara was reclining on the sofa with her feet on his lap. She was wearing a loose t-shirt that used to be his, now stretched by her belly. Her eyes half closed, a lazy smile. "She's going to have your nose," she murmured. Fernando smiled. He gently brushed her belly with his fingers. "I hope she doesn't inherit my obsession with control, or my stubbornness, or Mateo's temperament, or Santiago's unfiltered curiosity. We're doomed." They laughed together, softly, like someone laughing at a fear that no longer frightens. Outside, the swing moved with the wind. The terrace light enveloped them with that yellowish tone of home. Fernando looked around and understood, once again, that it was never about rebuilding what was lost. It was about allowing something new to be born, with deeper roots and space to grow. He kissed her belly, then Clara's feet, and murmured, almost without thinking, "Thank you for letting me stay." She opened her eyes. She rested her face against his. "Thank you for not leaving again." Outside, the city slept. Inside, a family woke up, day after day. And Isabella, even before she was born, already knew she would arrive at a home that took time, but learned to stay. If the story touched you in any way, if you felt in your chest the weight of decisions, of absences, and of reunions, then this journey was worth it. Love didn't come in a hurry, but it came to stay. And sometimes, all we need is someone to stay. Tell me below, do you believe in true new beginnings? Subscribe to the channel for more stories that stir the heart and turn it upside down. Like it if this narrative moved you. And remember, sometimes, what money can't buy is exactly what saves us. See you in the next story.